Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Susan Willson, who's here to share with us her new book, Making Sense of Menopause, Harnessing the Power and the Potency of Your Wisdom Years. So Susan is a Yale-educated certified nurse midwife and a certified clinical thermographer. With more than 40 years of experience in the women's health field, she has taught at Omega Institute and is a frequent lecturer for the American College of Nurse Midwives, where she lectures on women's health and the emotional work of menopause. So let's welcome to the show, Susan Willson.
Thanks, Marianne. I'm glad to be here.
My goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. What was the inspiration behind writing this book?
Well, I've been a women's health care provider for going on about 48 years now, and the last 22 have been working exclusively with women that are in the menopausal transition. And it became clear to me early on that women just really saw this as a time of loss and not much else. You know, even women who were not in the throes of physical symptoms, there would be this real grief that they brought in with them because our culture frames menopause as kind of the end of your life as a woman. And that interested me. It made me sad. And so I really wanted to reframe menopause different from the way that it's seen in our culture, because it's really part of a continuum. It doesn't just drop out of the sky and happen to you the way we tend to think of it. And I've always been in awe of the human body and how it works and how it prepares us for what's coming. So I wrote a book that really looked at the whole biological continuum of a woman's life. While the title focuses on menopause, and certainly I would say the bulk of the book is more about the midlife transition, I actually start in the womb with how we actually become female to start with and go through the biological continuum and of menarche and pregnancy briefly and perimenopause and menopause, and how nature really prepares us for each new step and why, that there really is a plan in place that we can trust.
And there's so much languaging around menopause and women who hit middle age. I mean, we just recently had, not on this show, but on another show, talked about how women, hit their prime at 30, as if we're, something on the shelf that's going to go bad.
Right. I would disagree with the 30 thing. I mean, it may be their fertility prime or something like that, but I really just see so much positive and purposeful in the menopausal years.
So what are some things that we can expect as we start going through menopause?
Well, of course, that is different for every woman. There are some kind of broad brushstrokes about that in terms of physical symptoms. For most women, periods start to change a bit. Women will have more of what we tend to think of as PMS symptoms. They might have periods that are longer or further apart, or that carry with them more of an emotional component. There may be more irritability, sleep disruption, things like that. And what's interesting is that many symptoms that are totally normal in menopause might at some other time of your life indicate a physical problem. So it does happen that women often feel like something horrible is happening to them, that these symptoms indicate something much darker and deeper. And go in to see physicians who don't have this at the forefront of their mind, I will say. Women's care at midlife in the medical community is severely lacking. And so the doctor will do what they usually do, which is run a bunch of tests. And of course, everything will come out normal. And they'll say to the woman, there's really nothing wrong with you. So that implies really that it's all in your head, or it's just stress, or you're just being female, or whatever. And so I think it's important to understand what's happening in the body, why these symptoms might be starting to show themselves, what's going on in the hormonal balance that causes them to happen, what you can actually do to support your body so that you don't have to have symptoms that are extremely disruptive, that sort of thing. But for most people, it's just beginning to feel a little more PMSy and starting to see changes in mood and sleep and things like that.
So that's just basically a fact of life. We're constantly in a body that's forever changing.
Yes.
Well, and so how can we look at this in a new way as we are going through menopause?
Well, I like to, as I said, I really trust the body, and I like to think that the body is preparing us and showing us the way. So every woman's interface with this process is going to be slightly different depending on how she sees herself as a woman, what symptoms tend to mean in the story of her personal life. And how she has handled her health in the past. There are many things we can do to put a solid foundation under us, and the earlier we start, the better. Some of these are what's hardest for many of us to do, which are the lifestyle changes, but even doing one can make such a huge difference in terms of the ripple effect. Stress and how we handle our stress is really at the root of most of the physical symptoms that women encounter in menopause, because nature's plan is to have the adrenals and the fat cells take over hormone production as the ovaries start to wind down. And most women in our culture arrive at midlife with their adrenals really exhausted. We have like 5 plates spinning at a time. Most women are both working and doing most of the work at home as well. And so we get to menopause when the adrenals are supposed to be taking over and there's nothing there to catch the ball. And that's when things begin to unwind and symptoms become more difficult. I've had women say to me over and over again, well, sure, I've got stress, but it's no worse than it's ever been. And I miss a period or two, and all of a sudden, hot flashes, night sweats, can't sleep, hair's thinning, gaining weight, angry all the time. How can just missing a period or two make all of this happen? And of course, the answer is that it isn't just that you've missed a period or two, but that the whole mechanism that's supposed to be there in place there in your body to take over can't do it. Managing stress. I also like to have women look back at what their other hormonal transitions were like and how that came out for them, because that can be very reassuring. I mean, most of us were not aware enough at the time of puberty to really be observing it from the outside, if you will. But, we were just kind of in the spin cycle of it. But we emerged from puberty. We found our footing and our next place as women. And same with pregnancy. No pregnant woman will ever argue the fact that your body doesn't belong to you anymore, that something has taken over and you're being changed into a different being. But again, we find our balance on the other side of it. And we can really trust that the same thing will happen with menopause. I think it's largely our idea and the way we frame it that it's something that's kind of random, happens to us, that we have no control over, that makes it start to feel like we are so out of control. I think if we can remember, yes, we've done this several times and, always found our footing on the other side for the next thing that nature is preparing us to do, I think it helps to stay positive that way.
So, as we are starting perimenopause, and I'd love for you to explain what that is, what are some things we can expect?
Well, perimenopause is the 5 to 8 years before we actually go through menopause. And menopause is defined as having 1 full year without any periods. So, in those 5 to 8 years going up, as I mentioned before, many women have more PMS type symptoms. And these are caused by a shift in the hormonal balance. The two main hormones that run our menstrual cycle are estradiol, which is one of the forms of estrogen that we have, and progesterone, and they each have their own job to do. The estrogens build up the uterine lining, and then around mid-cycle, the progesterone rises and keeps it from building up any further and starts to change it into the kind of lining that can accept a fertilized egg. And then when the progesterone drops, you have a period. So leading up to menopause, progesterone levels start to fall much, much earlier than the estrogen levels do. And that's why you see more erratic periods, sometimes because there's not enough progesterone to block further development of the uterine lining. A lot of women will have very heavy periods all of a sudden, or other women may go for longer times between their periods. The cycle becomes longer. Progesterone's also a calming hormone. So when those levels start to drop, we see a lot more irritability, and sometimes cramps get worse. So the whole balance begins to shift, and that's what causes the perimenopausal symptoms that we have. And for many women, this is the most difficult transition in menopause, is before menopause actually happens. It's not after you've had that full year of no periods, then things start to calm down and become, more of a steady state for women. But it's when we first start having periods, often our hormones come in spits and spurts, and girls will have a period or two and then not have them for a while before they get onto a regular cycle. Same thing happens at the other end. You can go 7-8 months without having a period and think, good, I'm finally on the other side of this, and then go back and have 3 or 4 in a regular cycle. So it's a time of disruption for many women because of the shift in hormone balance.
So, how does our body see stress during this time?
Well, I think our body pretty much sees stress the way it always has. We were made as human bodies to essentially run into a mastodon on the plane, have this tidal wave of hormones move through our body that make it possible for us to run faster, fight harder, climb a higher tree, and survive that encounter. But in nature, usually once you've survived the encounter, things kind of come back to normal and are in steady state again until that happens again. But because the body doesn't really know the difference between mastodon on the plane or medical illness, financial stress, sitting in traffic, job deadlines, fight with your spouse, it's all stress. And so the body responds in the same way. So women in our culture are often in a mild fight or flight response almost 24 hours a day, because whenever this is triggered, it lasts for 2 or 3 hours. And if you're going through a regular modern stressful life, that's often being triggered several times a day. So we're more in what I think of as a stew and chew mode rather than full-blown flight or flight, but it still begins to exhaust the adrenals. And for some women, this even continues into the night, because the more stressed your adrenals are, the more irregular your blood sugar becomes. And a lot of women have a drop in blood sugar in the middle of the night, and it'll wake them up at 2 or 3 in the morning, because that's a priority for the body. The brain lives on a very narrow bandwidth of blood sugar to be safe. And so if our blood sugar drops too far at night, the body wakes us up and puts us into fight or flight, because the first thing that happens in that process is that your blood sugar gets raised. So then you're flipping and flopping for a couple of hours in the middle of the night, can't get back to sleep, because also the stress hormones have been released, the cortisol. So, given the kind of lives we're living, many women, as I said, arrive at menopause with really exhausted adrenals and have a much more difficult time. Something even as simple as making sure you get to bed at 10:30 at night and don't have devices going, things with blue screen television right before you go to bed, can have a huge ripple effect. Because if you're in bed before 10:30, you tend to get much deeper sleep, which is when the adrenals do their replenishing of themselves and their repair. If you stay up much later than that, your body thinks you need a second wind to stay up and do what you're doing, and will mount fight or flight to give you that energy. So something as simple as just altering bedtime can have a huge ripple effect down the road. There are many, many things, of course, too much to go into right now, but I do have a couple of chapters in the book about adrenals and stress. I do think that it's important to note that the body basically doesn't really even distinguish much between good stress and bad stress. You can have a woman who loves her life that gets up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym, get her workout before work, and then, gets her double strength latte, goes to work, does a job she loves all day long, finishes up, has dinner with friends, falls in bed 11:30 or midnight, and gets up and does it again. And her body is being triggered into fight or flight all day in just the same way that someone who's having to work 2 jobs or has an abusive spouse or something. Now, that person will also kind of carry the epigenetic burden of the abuse. One woman will be happier, certainly, than the other, but both of their bodies are having to deal with day-long stress.
We hear so many negative stories about menopause. What are some of the falsehoods that are out there that we just should be aware of?
Well, I think it's really interesting to begin with that we as women tend to tell our negative stories a lot more than we do our positive ones. And that also holds true for pregnancy. When women generally talk about their births or something, it's always about how hard it was, how the baby almost died, what the emergency was. And that's always interested me as well. And I think it's because in a lot of ways, we're still working out our trauma. We experienced something that felt like trauma to us. We've never had a witness for that. And so those are the stories we tell, and they tend to color the generationally, they color like how women are taught what's coming for them. Culturally, they also color that. So I think it's really important that we look at what our stories actually are and why we tell the ones that we do. And that's partly, why I've wanted to reframe this so much. There is a wonderful sense of liberation that also comes with menopause. You hear women say all the time, I just don't care so much what people think anymore. Women are more willing to look at themselves, be themselves authentically. And I think the more consciously we look at this and work with this, the more we get out of it. So the book I've written, as it goes through the continuum of a woman's life, has sections in it called Going Deeper that have a lot of questions for a woman to ask herself about her early life, or how her identity as a woman was formed, or how she was received, or what the different stories are that have gone into making up who she thinks of herself. Because we do tend to land on certain stories that we tell over and over about ourselves and end up defining us. So I think midlife is a wonderful time to really take a step back and look at how we've defined ourselves and what went into that, and just sift through it and see if it is authentic to us now, to see if it still rings true or if it ever was really true. And a lot of women feel very, very liberated by this. And women step out and try new things. In fact, nature really supports us to do this as well. As I mentioned, the estrogen that runs the menstrual cycle during our fertile years is estradiol. And estradiol kind of hits a place in the brain that makes us want to make babies and nurture everything in sight and scan men for their genetic potential, when they walk in a room, even if we're happily paired. It's just nature impulsing us to reproduce and to nurture those babies. And when menopause comes along, the estradiol levels drop and estriol levels rise. And estriol hits receptors in the brain that are in our creative centers. So you find women kind of emerging from this hormonal trance we've been in that has allowed us to keep putting other people in front of us and to be the doormat for our families, and, emerging to want to dance that dance, write that book, paint that painting, start that business, whatever it is that you really want to do. And if we can become aware of what those gifts are and what it is we wish to give to the world, this is what's really prominent in this last arc of our lives is, what is our gift? What do we want to give? What do we want to leave behind us? And how are we going to create that succession? Because you can live a bright flare of a life, but if you have no one coming behind you to carry it forward, it dies with you. So it's a very rich time of life. And in fact, anthropologists tell us that it was once women started living long enough to become grandmothers that we really started making evolutionary leaps, because back in the way back, women had a very limited amount of time to be able to nurture any offspring before they were pregnant with the next one. And survival was really the most important thing. So when grandmothers came along, they were able to gather more food. They were able to keep the young children safe. And they also carried with them the history of the tribe and the stories. And that kind of woke up a different part of the human brain. And there are still many cultures today in which midlife and elder women are the most revered in the tribe, and they're the ones that make the major decisions. Long answer to a short question. Sorry.
No, it's fine. That's fine. I'm glad that we're having this discussion. And one of the things I found interesting in your book, you talk about how medical professionals, like the medical community, is just oriented to fixing. So when we show up and we're having symptoms of perimenopause or menopause, they're trying to fix it. Does that kind of give the sense that we are broken, is kind of what we're hearing when that happens?
Yes, I do think that that's the attitude. And I think, too, part of it is that often women we're so busy with our lives that we kind of wake up to it in the middle of the process. We haven't given thought to the fact that, oh, this might be coming, or what does it mean, or how can I help myself? And the first harbinger of that really are these symptoms that all of a sudden we're noticing in our bodies. And so often I found, there were always those women who came in kind of proactively and said, okay, I know this is coming down the road. What can I do now to help myself? And that was always such a joy, because you really can put things in place to help yourself and kind of sail through what most women are suffering with if you do that ahead of time. But most women come in when they're just really in the throes of symptoms, and they do want someone to fix them. They want to kind of get back to the way they were, even if it wasn't great, because at least it's familiar. And so I think that kind of comes a little on both sides. Women go in having symptoms, they're going, you got to help me, I can't do this anymore. And our medical community is definitely oriented toward symptom reduction and not looking at what the root cause of something is and addressing that.
So in your book, you talk about menopause being a crossroads. What does that mean?
Well, I've noticed really that this is a time of life where women generally either kind of come into themselves and move forward feeling more powerful, more settled and easy in themselves with purpose in their life, or they buy more into the message that your life is over, forget it, you'll never be attractive to anyone anymore, your children are gone, and they just start to kind of diminish and fade away. And so I've really thought of it that way, and I'm hoping that more and more women will see that this is actually part of what nature has in place, that's purposeful, it's positive, and can be very, very liberating.
So I know we've talked about a few, but what are some self-care practices that we can start developing as we hit and are going through and after menopause?
Yeah, I think coming up to midlife, one of the more important things we can do is to create a rhythm in our lives so that our bodies know when to have the right amount of energy available. If our body knows when we're roughly going to be waking up, eating, being more active, being more settled, going to sleep, it can have the right amount of energy available for that at the right time. If we tend to be random and all over the place, our body has to have high amounts of energy available all the time. It's kind of like a bank account. You have a certain amount of energy, and if you overspend it needlessly, it won't be there when you have it. So creating a rhythm, number one, can be very helpful. I think another thing, and it's something I suggest women do, it's easy and sometimes very enlightening, is to sit down and make a good for me, bad for me list. Kind of go through your day and your life and see exactly what it is that you do and how much of it are you doing for other people And how much of that can they do for themselves? Like if you're picking up your teenager's socks and, straightening things up all the time and using your time and energy for that, is that something that your teenager's capable of doing for themselves? And begin to tease out what nourishes you, what brings you pleasure, what makes you feel better, and those things that just drain you of energy and don't give anything back. And which of those can you let go of or delegate? I mean, there are certainly things, especially in our generation, we have midlife women who are still caring for parents and children and are kind of in the middle of that. So if you have certain obligations and people dependent on you, it may not feel like something that's nourishing you, but it may not be something you can give up right away either. So to look at creating some boundaries about that. And I've got some stories about that in the book too, about what was successful for people. But pleasure changes so much in our bodies. It changes the neurotransmitters in our brain. It changes our mood. It changes our microbiome. It changes everything. So I really encourage women to look at what brings them pleasure and to try to start bringing more of that back into their life. Because again, in our culture, it's not something that we're encouraged to do. And in fact, quite often women are shamed for doing it. So creating a rhythm, kind of figuring out where you are in time, trying to bring in more of what's positive in your life, changing your bedtime, taking a look at your overall health and how you're handling it. How is your blood sugar? How is your blood pressure? Do you get some time outdoors every day or exercising? Just beginning to take stock early on and making some very small changes can make a huge difference. When you start having more PMSy symptoms, talk to your provider, find someone who's knowledgeable about hormone balance and see if you can get a little natural progesterone for the second half of your cycle to bring up these levels that are starting to drop and cause all these symptoms. And really, if you start early, many women don't have much in the way of symptoms at all.
So do we have to take our environment in consideration as well?
Mm-hmm. Because I think that, we know, for instance, that our bodies express based on our environment. That's called epigenetics. And it's a science that's really come into view in the last 20 years. When they were unraveling the human genome, they found far, far fewer genes than they thought they would, because we were always looking at genes as being causative. Like this gene causes brown hair, this gene causes blue eyes, this gene causes this tendency toward disease. But what they actually found out is that there are far fewer genes, and they are triggered to express or not based on what our environment is telling us. That makes total sense because the human body hasn't really changed that much since we hit the planet, but each baby needs to be ready to survive in the environment that it's born into, which has changed hugely over the last 100 years. And even when you think about it now, we have whole generations growing up in the middle of war. So a baby that's being born into a war-torn country is going to need to have a much more sensitive survival mechanism than a baby being born in a sleepy town in the Midwest. And so that all starts to happen when the baby's brain is being informed inside the mother as it's growing. If the mother's living a very, very stressful life, the baby is taking in these stress hormones. The brain thinks, okay, I better be ready for it. This is, a dangerous world I'm being born into. And so some people are really kind of more on a hair trigger in terms of going into stress response than others. Now, that's not like, a curse that you're just stuck with. There are many ways that can be modulated after someone is born and as they're growing up. But our environment is huge, whether it's when you're little, if there was safety in the home and your body felt safe, then your brain can grow in ways that, more in the neocortex and can evolve in different ways than if you're in an environment that is not safe. So looking back at our early stories, understanding why we may have responded in certain ways that we did and the environments that we find ourselves in now is very informative, and I think can also really help grow self-compassion, because I think a lot of us blame ourselves for anything that's not right in our lives and feel like, I'm bad or wrong, or this is all my fault. Whereas if you really look back and see the way all the pieces were put in sequence and put together, we can have a different understanding and a different way of looking at ourselves. But yes, our environment is huge through our whole lives, not just at menopause.
Well, and to kind of piggyback on that, how important is community during the times we're experiencing menopause?
Again, huge. And all through our lives, they've done a lot of studies in the last few years, kind of what I think of as the blue zone studies, where they were looking at places in the world or communities in the world where people tended to age strongly and live long and very really thriving lives and active lives until their deaths. And they were looking, of course, as we are scientists, we look at what are they eating, how much exercise do they get, all of those sorts of things. And the main thing that they found across all of these things, there were certain dietary things that stood out, but nothing that was the same in all of them. Community was that major factor, feeling a part of something, not feeling isolated, having the support and the joy, again, the pleasure, the joy that comes from community.
Well, in your book, you talk about how we become the wise woman. What does that mean, and what strengths does that build?
Well, for me, I think of the wise woman. It's different for everyone in a certain way, but it's some of the attributes that I talked about earlier. Women tend to feel more settled with who they are, more accepting of who they are, not caring so much and making their behavior dependent on what other people think. They tend to step out and speak their truth more. And I would say that our world needs the voices of mature women now more than ever. The wise woman also holds the long view and is able to help those coming behind, bring them forward and help to establish their confidence as well. One of the things I talk about in my book, because I personally see this as something of importance, is that my generation was one of the last to really come up without technology. I remember, of course, I had my baby late. I was almost 45, but I remember sitting there with a nursing infant and keep getting these discs in the mail from AOL and thinking, what is that? And I decided to stick one in a computer one night and see what it did. And it took 45 minutes to load a page. And I'm thinking, who would ever use this for anything? And that's when I was 45. We didn't really have higher speed internet until I was in my early 50s. So the world has changed a lot in the last 20, 25 years. And now we have babies on devices and parents on devices. And, as the human body is meant to be, we as humans, both our body and our consciousness, I believe, is intertwined inextricably with that of the earth and with nature. And the job of young children is to be out in nature and explore it. And that's just not happening in the same way anymore, nor are younger people getting the benefit of real presence. Everyone is very distracted and often on devices, and relationships are most often virtual relationships. They don't get what it is to be in the presence of someone who is just there with them, who will do tasks with them, help them to learn things. And I'm afraid we're going to lose it if our generation doesn't really make the conscious effort to take time with young people and be present with them. And so I do talk about that some as well. But the wise woman is essentially becoming self-actualized, knowing who you are, being comfortable with that and what you have to give, and then being active about giving it.
Is there a sense that as we hit midlife that we're just a little bit more understanding of that our mortality is kind of coming to a place of ending?
I think so for most people, especially in the world these days. We're seeing so much violence lately that you don't even have to be coming to midlife to really feel that way. But I think often the last arc of our life is kind of colored by what our beliefs are about what happens after death. And if there is a lot of fear about that, we tend to hold more tightly and not be as comfortable. Whereas if we're more in tune, I guess, if you would say, with the cycles of nature, and that this comes and then the next thing comes and all of it's purposeful, those people tend to relax a little more toward the end of their life, really enjoy it, and really give to their communities in a different way, I think. That's a personal opinion.
Well, I probably will agree with you on that, though. So, I would have the same personal opinion.
Yeah.
But
No
it's
science there, or that I've read anyway. But
well, and so as we look at this new age of menopause and how we're redefining what that is, what are some things that you want our listeners to take away from not just your book, but this discussion?
I think some of the important points that I would like to make in terms of reframing this, to reiterate that menopause is a part of a continuum. It's not something that drops out of the sky, happens to us, that we need to fear. Every step we've lived in our lives has led up to this and prepared us for it, and will continue to prepare us for what comes after. We can trust that. And that's one important piece. It's a positive, purposeful process. And I like to remind women, you've got this. You've been through several hormonal transitions in your life. And while they may have been a little challenging in the middle of it, you came out of it, you found your footing again, and you've gone on to thrive in the next phase. And this will happen again. I would like to remind women of the power of joy and pleasure, and to try to bring more of that into their lives. And I think it's really important that we both become aware of and that we tell our stories now, because this both helps us to see how we got to where we are, and to release things that we may still be holding that are traumatic, and able to move forward. And that's always done best. I mean, the process isn't complete until you've been witnessed. And so I really encourage women to create a menopause posse, get together with some other women that they're close to that don't have to be in the thick of it themselves. There can be a range of ages, but to start to, go out, have a regular time and talk about some of these things. In fact, I would love to see groups of women pick up this book and go through it in order in terms of informing themselves about that time of their life and thinking about things that happened then, answering the going deeper questions together, talking to each other, because I think a lot of self-compassion can come from that. And again, the creation of community, which we talked about, which is so important. And what we need to do at this time of life is to get back to our authentic voice, to find who we are really and begin to express that, because that's when the last arc of life is going to be the richest. And, menopause is really a gift. So I encourage women to take up more space, honor yourself, speak your truth, begin the process now, however old you are. I mean, the title of the book focuses on menopause, but this is a book that can be useful to anyone, really, especially women from like 30 to 80, because it helps you prepare, it helps you understand what's going on, and encourages you to really kind of take it back and know yourself. And I've had many women write to me, and many men saying, my partner really loved this because he understood something for the first time that he'd never really gotten. And communication with our partners are so important at this time of life, because otherwise a lot of assumptions are made. Things can become very difficult. Men as well are going through a midlife hormonal change themselves, and often both because women's frustration and anger tends to rise more to the surface at this time of life when they're going through all of that, as well as the fact that they're just not communicating very well with their partners anymore. Many marriages break up at this time, relationships break up at this time. So it doesn't matter if your partners are male or female. There's opening up the lines of communication is really, really important, so that you can create the next arc of your life together with your partner.
Well, Susan, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your community and be part of all the great things you're doing?
Well, I have a website out there called Making Sense of Menopause.com. And on the website, I've got basic information. I blog, I upload, podcasts and conversations with people. So there's a lot of information on the website. The book can be ordered anywhere. And I, of course, have, the usual social media outlets out there too, that I'm trying to learn to manage myself. I'm a dinosaur when it comes to technology, but I'd really like to engage with people. And I do encourage women, if they, have questions. I'm not able to personally answer medical questions. I can't take on that kind of relationship online. But if they would like to see me write about something in particular or talk about something, I really encourage them to write to me and let me know, because I want this, above all, to be useful to women.
Well, Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Susan. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Making Sense of Menopause. Making Sense of Menopause is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order. And of course, remember to support our indie bookstores. Make sure to visit Susan's website at makingsenseofmenopause.com. Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.